Single dad goes on a Christmas blind date no one wanted, but what she said changed everything. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Grant Sullivan sat in his truck outside the Pine and Plate restaurant on December 20th at 6:45 in the evening, staring at the Christmas lights wrapped around every single window like they were personally mocking his entire existence. And he was about 3 seconds away from just starting the engine and driving straight home and texting his best friend Jackson that he got hit with sudden food poisoning or his truck broke down or literally any excuse that didn't involve admitting he was too terrified to walk through those doors and sit across from a stranger pretending he was ready to move on with his life. The snow was coming down in those big fat flakes that make everything look like one of those cheesy Hallmark movies his late wife Emily used to watch every December. Except Grant's life was definitely not a Hallmark movie because those don't include dead wives and 9-year-old daughters who write letters to Santa asking for someone to make their daddy smile again instead of asking for toys or video games like normal kids. His phone buzzed in his cup holder, and it was Jackson for the fourth time in 20 minutes. This text said, "Grant, I swear to God, if you bail on this, I'm telling Lily you're a coward." And Grant typed back, "That's a low blow, man." But Jackson just sent the shrugging emoji followed by, "Her name's Nora. She's incredible. Just trust me on this one." Grant looked at himself in the rearview mirror and saw a guy who hadn't worn a tie since Emily's funeral 3 years ago. A guy who looked exactly like someone about to fake a heart attack to get out of a blind date he never wanted to go on in the first place. Here's the thing about losing your wife right before Christmas. It absolutely destroys every Christmas that comes after. Or at least that's what Grant thought until his daughter Lily started leaving those notes around the house this year, asking Santa to bring things like someone to make daddy laugh again, instead of the new iPad all her friends were getting. And it completely wrecked him because his 9-year-old was using her one Christmas wish to try and fix her broken father instead of being a kid. Emily died December 21st, 3 years ago. Sudden brain aneurysm while making breakfast. 1 second she was pouring orange juice and complaining about Grant leaving his work boots in the hallway again. The next second she was on the floor and Grant was screaming into the phone at 911. And he hadn't been able to look at Christmas the same way since then. He just went through all the motions for Lily's sake so she wouldn't know he was completely falling apart on the inside. He forced himself out of the truck because he'd pinky promised Lily that morning, and Sullivans don't break pinky promises no matter what. And he walked into the restaurant that was decorated within an inch of its life, with garland and lights and poinsettias everywhere. Christmas music playing just loud enough to remind everyone it's the most wonderful time of the year, even when you feel like complete garbage. The hostess smiled at him and said, "Sullivan party of two." And Grant nodded because apparently Jackson had made the reservation under his name. And she led him to a corner booth where a woman was already sitting there, looking down at her phone with an expression that clearly said she did not want to be there either. Grant slid into the booth and the woman looked up, and he saw she had these really kind brown eyes that also looked exhausted and maybe a little bit panicked. And before he could even introduce himself, she said, "Please tell me you're as uncomfortable with this whole situation as I am, because my sister literally ambushed me into coming here tonight, and I've been sitting here for 10 minutes trying to figure out a polite way to leave." Grant felt this massive wave of relief wash over him, and he actually laughed for the first time in weeks. "Oh, thank God. Yeah, I'm Grant. And my best friend guilted me into this by using my 9-year-old daughter as leverage. I was seriously considering faking a work emergency about 2 minutes ago." The woman smiled, and it was genuine and a little bit sad at the same time. "I'm Nora, and my little sister Tessa literally told me if I didn't come tonight, she was going to show up at my apartment and drag me here herself. So here I am, against my better judgment." They both just sat there for a second looking at each other, and then Grant said, "Look, I'm just going to be completely honest with you. My daughter forced me into this, and I'm really not ready to be dating anyone. I'm still a mess from losing my wife 3 years ago, and this whole thing feels wrong." Nora's whole face softened, and she reached across the table but didn't actually touch him, just kind of hovered her hand there. "I really appreciate you saying that, because I'm not ready either. My sister keeps telling me I need to get back out there and start living my life, but I don't think she understands how complicated everything is for me right now." Grant felt something unlock in his chest that had been stuck tight for 3 years. So what if we just eat dinner and be honest with each other and have zero pressure? And then after tonight, we never have to speak about this again? Nora's smile got bigger. That sounds absolutely perfect. I'm actually starving, and the menu here looks amazing, so let's just be two people having dinner and not a blind date. Deal? They shook hands across the table and ordered food, and suddenly the conversation just started flowing in a way Grant hadn't experienced since Emily was alive. He told her about his architecture firm and how he specialized in designing memorial buildings and healing spaces, and she told him she was a grief counselor at a hospice facility, helping families navigate the worst moments of their lives. And they both understood on this deep level what it meant to carry other people's pain for a living. Nora kept doing this thing where she'd touch her chest right over her heart when she got emotional talking about her work. And Grant noticed but figured it was just a nervous habit and didn't want to make herself conscious by asking about it. She asked him about his wife in this really gentle way that didn't feel invasive, just genuinely curious. And Grant found himself actually talking about Emily instead of just shutting down like he usually did. She died December 21st, 3 years ago. Sudden medical thing, brain aneurysm out of nowhere. 1 second we were a normal family having breakfast, and the next second my whole world ended. And Christmas has been completely frozen in time ever since, because I can't separate the holiday from losing her. Grant's voice cracked a little bit on the words, and he looked down at his plate. And when he looked back up, Nora's face had gone completely pale, and her hand was pressed flat against her chest, and she had tears just streaming down her face. Nora, hey, I'm sorry I didn't mean to dump all that on you. Are you okay? Grant reached for his water to hand it to her, but she was already shaking her head, and the tears were coming faster. December 21st, 3 years ago. What time did she pass away? Nora's voice came out barely above a whisper, and Grant's whole body went cold, because why would she ask that specific question? Around 10 in the morning, she was pronounced brain dead at the hospital by 11. Why? What's going on? Nora covered her mouth with both hands, and she was full-on crying now, and people at other tables were starting to stare. Grant, I need to tell you something about your wife, and I don't know how to say this without completely destroying everything, but you deserve to know the truth about why I'm really here tonight. Grant's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. What are you talking about? Did you know Emily? How is that even possible? Nora took this shaky breath and looked him straight in the eyes. 3 years ago, on December 21st, I was dying in a hospital 4 miles from here. I had end-stage heart failure, and I'd been on the transplant list for 2 years with no matches, and the doctors told my family I had maybe 2 weeks left if I was lucky. Grant felt like the floor was tilting sideways, and he gripped the edge of the table. I don't understand what this has to do with Emily. Nora's voice was shaking, but she kept going. That same morning around 11 a.m., a donor match came through. Emergency transplant surgery. They gave me a new heart and it saved my life. I woke up 3 days later with someone else's heart beating in my chest. She pressed both hands flat against her chest right over her heart. Grant, your wife Emily was my organ donor. I have her heart. It's beating inside me right now. Every single beat for the last 3 years has been because of her sacrifice. Grant stood up so fast his chair scraped loud against the floor, and every single person in the restaurant turned to look at them. And he just stood there staring at this woman, this complete stranger who was sitting there crying and telling him she had Emily's heart, and his brain couldn't process it, couldn't make sense of any of it. I can't. I need to go. I'm sorry, I just can't do this right now. And he was already grabbing his coat and walking toward the door. And behind him, he could hear Nora saying, Grant, please wait. But he couldn't stop moving, because if he stopped, he was going to completely break down in the middle of this restaurant. He pushed through the front doors into the snow and got in his truck and just sat there with his hands on the steering wheel shaking, and all he could think about was Emily's heart was still beating somewhere in the world, and he'd just been sitting across from it, having dinner like it was a normal blind date, and nothing about his life made sense anymore. Grant drove home in complete shock and had to pull over twice on the side of the road because he couldn't breathe right and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. And when he finally made it to his house, Lily was waiting up in her pajamas with this big, hopeful smile on her face that absolutely destroyed him. Daddy, how was your date? Did you like her? Is she nice? Are you going to see her again? And Grant couldn't even form words, so he just pulled his daughter into a hug and held on, maybe a little too tight while trying not to completely lose it in front of her. His phone started ringing, and it was Jackson calling for the third time since he left the restaurant. And Grant finally answered and said, "You knew, didn't you? You knew she had Emily's heart, and you set this whole thing up without telling me?" And his voice came out way angrier than he meant it to. Jackson's voice on the other end was quiet and careful. "Yeah, man, I knew. I thought it would help you. Somehow. I thought maybe meeting her would give you closure or peace or something. She's an incredible person, Grant, and I really believe this could be good for both of you." Grant hung up without saying another word because he felt so betrayed and confused and angry at everyone, including himself, for walking out on Nora like that when she was clearly just as messed up about the whole situation as he was. He put Lily to bed and then sat alone in his kitchen staring at the donor card paperwork from 3 years ago that he'd kept in a drawer and never looked at. All the forms he'd signed at the hospital while Emily was on life support, saying yes to organ donation, because she'd always told him that's what she wanted if anything ever happened to her. The thing was, Grant had never wanted to know who got Emily's organs. The hospital had given him the option to request information after a year, and he'd thrown the letter away because knowing felt like it would make everything more real, and he wasn't ready for that. Now he was sitting here realizing he'd just had dinner with the woman who had Emily's heart, and he'd walked out on her, left her sitting there crying in a restaurant full of people, and he felt like the worst person alive, but he also didn't know how to process any of this or what he was even supposed to feel. Meanwhile, across town, Nora got back to her apartment around 9, and her younger sister Tessa was sitting on the couch, waiting with this expectant look that immediately fell when she saw Nora's face. "Oh no, what happened? I thought you guys would hit it off. Jackson said Grant was amazing." And Nora just stood there in the doorway, still wearing her coat with tears running down her face. "Tess, it was him. It was Emily's husband, the woman who saved my life 3 years ago. I just told her widower that I have his dead wife's heart beating in my chest, and he walked out, and I don't blame him because this is the most insane situation that's ever happened to anyone." Tessa's mouth fell open and she pulled Nora over to the couch. "Wait, Jackson set you up with Emily Sullivan's husband. There's no way that's a coincidence. He had to have known." Nora was crying harder now. "Of course he knew. I told Jackson about the transplant months ago when we met at that charity thing. I told him I'd been trying to find Emily's family for 2 years because I wanted them to know how grateful I was. And he must have thought setting us up on a blind date was somehow a good idea instead of completely traumatic for everyone involved." The truth was, Nora had hired a private investigator 18 months ago to find out who her donor was, because the not knowing was eating her alive. And when she found out it was Emily Sullivan who died saving 4 different people with her organ donations, Nora had spent weeks just sitting outside Grant's architecture office in her car, watching him come and go because she needed to see the person whose wife had saved her life. She'd seen him with Lily, watched them grab coffee on Saturday mornings, saw how sad he looked even when he was smiling at his daughter, and she'd wanted so badly to walk up and introduce herself. But she had no idea how to start that conversation without it being completely weird. When Tessa had told her 2 weeks ago that she'd set up a blind date with this amazing single dad her friend Jackson knows, Nora had said yes because she figured it would be some random guy, and maybe it would get Tessa off her back about dating. But the second Tessa mentioned his name was Grant Sullivan, Nora had almost canceled 5 different times. Part of her thought maybe it was fate or Emily somehow bringing them together, and part of her thought it was the worst idea in human history, and clearly the second part was right, because now Grant knew the truth, and he'd run away, and she'd probably never see him again. 5 whole days went by, and Nora couldn't stop thinking about the look on Grant's face when she told him. That mixture of shock and pain, and something that looked almost like betrayal, and she must have written and deleted 20 different text messages trying to apologize or explain, but nothing felt right. December 21st came around, and Nora spent the entire day at the cemetery where Emily was buried. Not approaching the grave, because that felt too invasive. Just standing far away watching Grant and Lily leave flowers and sit there for over an hour. And Nora put her hand over her heart, feeling it beat steady and strong, and whispered, "Thank you, Emily. I'm so sorry I messed this up with your family." That night, Nora sat down and wrote an actual letter by hand because texting felt too impersonal for something this important. And she poured out everything she'd been carrying for 3 years, how she wakes up every single morning and feels Emily's heartbeat and says thank you out loud, how she became a grief counselor specifically because she wanted to honor the gift she'd been given by helping other people the way Emily had helped her, how she'd been following Grant from a distance for over a year, not in a creepy way, but just wanting to make sure he and Lily were okay. She wrote, "I understand completely if you never want to see me again, and I'm so incredibly sorry that our meeting happened the way it did. But I needed you to know that your wife saved my life, and I have tried every single day to live in a way that makes that sacrifice mean something. I don't take a single heartbeat for granted." She drove to Grant's office at midnight and left a letter with the night security guard to put on his desk, and then she went home and cried herself to sleep. Grant found the letter the next morning, December 22nd, and he sat in his truck in the parking lot, reading it over and over. And by the third time through, he was crying so hard he could barely see the words. He drove straight home and found Lily in the kitchen eating cereal, and she took one look at his face and said, "Daddy, what's wrong?" with this worried expression that made her look way older than 9 years old. Grant sat down next to her and said, "I need to tell you something about the lady I went on that date with. It's kind of complicated, but you're smart enough to understand." And he explained as gently as he could about organ donation and how when Mommy died, she helped save other people's lives, and how Nora was one of those people. Lily was quiet for a really long time, just processing, and then she looked at Grant with these serious eyes and said, "So Miss Nora has Mommy's heart inside her, keeping her alive?" And Grant nodded. "Yeah, baby, that's exactly right." Lily thought about it for another minute, and then said something that completely knocked the air out of Grant's lungs. "Mommy always told me her heart was big enough to love everyone in the whole world. Maybe her heart is still doing that. Maybe that's why it went to Miss Nora so it could keep loving people even though Mommy's not here anymore." Grant pulled Lily into his arms and just held her while crying, and she patted his back like she was the parent comforting the child. "Daddy, I think you should go see her. I think Mommy would want you to make sure her heart is happy." Grant was about to respond when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. And when he answered, a panicked voice said, "Grant, this is Tessa, Nora's sister. I know you don't know me, but Nora's at Denver General Hospital. She collapsed at work and they think it might be organ rejection. She's stable now, but she keeps asking for you. Please, I know this is crazy, but could you come?" Grant's entire world stopped spinning, and he grabbed his keys and told Lily to get her shoes on. And they were in the truck heading to the hospital within 2 minutes. And the whole drive, all Grant could think was, "Please don't let Emily's heart stop beating. Please let Nora be okay. Please give me a chance to make this right." They got to the hospital and Tessa met them in the waiting room, looking exhausted and relieved. "She's okay. It wasn't rejection. The doctors said it was a severe panic attack brought on by stress. But Grant, she's been making herself sick over what happened with you guys, and I'm really worried about her." Grant walked into Nora's room with Lily holding his hand, and Nora was sitting up in the hospital bed looking pale and tired with monitors hooked up to her. And when she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Grant. I didn't want Tessa to call you. You don't need to be here." Grant walked right up to the bedside and said, "Yes, I do. I'm sorry I walked out on you. I'm sorry I made you feel like you did something wrong when you didn't. You've been carrying this alone for 3 years, and that's not fair, can I? Is it okay if I listen?" Nora understood immediately what he was asking, and she nodded while crying, and the nurse handed Grant a stethoscope and showed him where to place it. And Grant put it against Nora's chest right over her heart, and he heard it, steady and strong, Emily's heart still beating after all this time. He broke down completely right there in the hospital room and whispered, "Hi, Em. I've missed you so much." And Nora was sobbing and Lily was crying, watching from the doorway, and Grant looked up at Nora and said, "Thank you for taking care of her heart. Thank you for living. I'm sorry I wasn't ready to see it, but I am now. Emily's still here, and that's because of you." Nora got released from the hospital on Christmas morning, And Grant insisted on picking her up with Lily because there was no way he was letting her spend Christmas alone after everything that had happened. And when they pulled up, Tessa was waiting outside with an overnight bag, looking relieved and exhausted at the same time. "Thank you for doing this, Grant. She needs people around her right now, and I have to work a double shift at the restaurant. I hate leaving her, but we need the money." And Grant just shook his head. "Don't even worry about it. She's coming home with us. You can pick her up tomorrow or whenever. Seriously, it's not a problem at all." The drive back to Grant's house was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet. Lily sitting in the back, holding Nora's hand and talking nonstop about all the cookies she'd made with Grandma Sullivan yesterday, and how she couldn't wait to show Nora her room that she'd decorated all by herself. When they got inside, Nora stopped in the doorway and just stared because the whole place was decorated for Christmas for the first time in 3 years. Lights on the banister and garland over the fireplace, and a tree in the corner covered in ornaments that clearly had years of family history. "Grant, this is beautiful. When did you do all this?" And Grant looked a little embarrassed. "Lily and I stayed up until 2 in the morning last night, putting it all up. We figured it was time to stop letting Christmas be sad and start making it mean something good again." Lily dragged Nora over to the tree and started pointing out specific ornaments. "This one is from when I was a baby, and this one Mommy made the year before she died. And Daddy said we should get you one too, so you're part of our Christmas from now on." And she held up a silver heart ornament with the date engraved on it. Nora completely broke down, crying, and pulled Lily into a hug. "Sweetheart, that's the most thoughtful thing anyone's ever done for me. Thank you so much." And Grant watched them together and felt this weird mix of sadness and hope that he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Like maybe his heart was finally remembering how to feel things besides grief. They spent the whole day together, and it felt surprisingly natural, making hot chocolate and watching Christmas movies, and Lily falling asleep on the couch between Grant and Nora around 8 o'clock. After they put Lily to bed, Grant and Nora sat in the living room with just the Christmas tree lights on, and Nora said quietly, "I need you to know I don't expect anything from you. I know this whole situation is incredibly complicated, and I don't want you to feel obligated to have me in your life just because of the transplant." Grant turned to face her. "Here's the thing, though. Before you told me about Emily's heart, I was already starting to like you. Like actually enjoying talking to you for the first time in years. And yeah, finding out the truth was a massive shock. But it doesn't change the fact that you're an incredible person who I want to get to know better." Nora's eyes got all watery again. "I've thought about you and Lily almost every day for 2 years. I know that probably sounds obsessive, but after I found out Emily was my donor, I needed to know that her family was okay. And watching you from a distance, I could see how much pain you were both in, and I wanted so badly to help, but I didn't know how." Grant reached over and took her hand. "You're helping right now just by being here. Lily said something yesterday that really stuck with me. She said maybe Emily's heart is still loving people, even though she's gone, and I think she's right. I think this is Emily's way of telling me it's okay to move forward." 6 months went by, and Grant and Nora took things incredibly slow. Coffee dates once a week and family dinners with Lily, and eventually Tessa joining them. And somewhere between February and June, Grant realized he was completely in love with this woman who carried his late wife's heart. They started visiting Emily's grave together every few weeks, and Nora would leave flowers and talk to the headstone like they were old friends. "Hi, Emily. I'm taking really good care of Grant and Lily. I promise I'm doing my best to honor what you gave me." And Grant would stand there with his arm around her, thinking how surreal and beautiful and strange his life had become. In July, Grant finally introduced Nora to his parents and to Emily's parents, which was terrifying for everyone involved. But Emily's mom, Patricia, took one look at Nora and just pulled her into this tight hug and whispered, "Thank you for keeping her heart beating. Thank you for giving us a piece of her back." And everyone was crying on Grant's back patio on a random Sunday afternoon. Nora started working part-time at Grant's architecture firm, consulting on hospice and hospital design projects, and they became this incredible team, both professionally and personally. And Lily started calling Nora by her first name, but in that affectionate way that made it clear she was family, even if she wasn't trying to replace Emily. December 20th rolled around again exactly 1 year after that disastrous blind date, and Grant told Nora he was taking her to dinner somewhere special. Wouldn't tell her where. Just said to dress nice. When they pulled up to the Pine and Plate restaurant, Nora looked at him confused. Why are we coming back here? This place has kind of traumatic memories, don't you think? Grant smiled and took her hand. Just trust me, okay? I've got this all planned out. And he led her inside to the exact same corner booth where they'd sat a year ago. They sat down and ordered drinks, and Nora kept looking around nervously like she was waiting for something terrible to happen again. And Grant reached across the table and took both her hands in his. So exactly 1 year ago, I walked into this restaurant absolutely not wanting to be here. I was planning my escape route before I even sat down. And then I met this incredible woman who was just as reluctant as I was. And we made a deal to just be honest with each other and see what happened. Nora was already tearing up because she could tell something big was coming. Grant, what are you doing right now? He slid out of the booth and got down on one knee right there in the middle of the restaurant and pulled out a ring. Nora Brennan, you are carrying Emily's heart, but you've also completely stolen mine. You showed me that love doesn't run out or get used up. It just grows and changes and finds new ways to exist. You've made Lily smile again, and you've made me remember what it feels like to actually be alive instead of just going through the motions. The entire restaurant had gone completely silent, and people were pulling out their phones to record. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making sure Emily's heart is as happy as it deserves to be? Nora was full-on ugly crying at this point and nodding so hard she could barely get words out. Yes, oh my God, yes, absolutely, yes, I love you so much, Grant. And the whole restaurant erupted in applause, and the same waitress who'd served them a year ago came running over with champagne. I was working that night when you both left crying. I just knew you'd end up back here. This is the most romantic thing I've ever seen in my life. They got married that next April in Emily's favorite month at a small outdoor ceremony in Grant's parents' backyard with about 50 people. And Lily was the maid of honor, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself, looking so grown up at 10 years old. Grant's vows destroyed everyone. I thought my heart died 3 years ago with Emily, but her actual heart knew better. It led me to you, Nora. It kept beating so I could find my way back to loving and living. And I promised to take care of you and Emily's heart for as long as I'm breathing. Nora's vows were just as emotional. Every single beat of this heart is a gift I don't take for granted. Emily saved my life and then brought me to you and Lily, and I promise to honor her every single day by loving you both as fiercely as she did. 2 years later, Grant and Nora were running a nonprofit called Emily's Heart Foundation that promoted organ donation awareness and provided grief counseling for donor families. And they traveled around Colorado telling their story to encourage people to register as donors. The final scene shows them at a donor awareness event with Lily, now 12 years old, helping at the registration table. And Grant has his hand over Nora's heart, feeling it beat steady and strong. And Nora whispers, "Thank you for showing up that night, even when you didn't want to." And Grant whispers back, "Thank you for carrying her heart and bringing our family back to life." Sometimes the date you're dreading turns into the thing that saves you. Grant didn't want to be there, and Nora didn't want to be there, but Emily's heart had other plans. It knew they needed each other even when they didn't know it themselves. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms and grows and finds new homes. It keeps beating long after we think it stopped. If this story reminded you that second chances are real, that organ donation literally saves lives, that hearts can heal in the most unexpected ways, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that moving forward isn't forgetting, it's honoring what was by choosing to keep living. Thanks so much for being here with us, and remember, sometimes the heart knows the way even when the mind is lost.